Well, welcome back, everybody, to our sixth chapter of the book, which is called Abandon Ideology. My first question for everyone, what is ideology?
No idea.
Can I try?
Yes, Charlotte.
Yes.
I think ideology is something that to do with social norms or like common thoughts in people's head. But it is not necessarily true. What do you think?
Yeah, I think belief systems.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to say it's difference between having values and norms. I think ideology is more pervasive. We're going to exclude everyone that doesn't agree with our ideology. It seems much more dark and malevolent when you talk about ideology. It's like if you don't agree with me, then we're enemies. I think he makes that point in the chapter.
Yeah.
It's more divisive than uniting.
Just off the top of my head, I think an ideology is a set of doctrines or beliefs that are shared by members of a social group or form the base of a political, economic, or other system. Just the top of my head.
Okay. Well, thanks, Webb.
So what's interesting is how Jordon starts this chapter. He talks about he's traveling around the world. He does 160 lectures. He goes to these incredible buildings, and he talks about how the common response or the common personal story of people coming to him. He has a typical story of a guy saying, I was broken. I was just, dealing with some family issues or economic issues. And I read your book or I listened to your lectures, and I've completely changed my life. And he says the resonant thing was responsibility. Make your bed. And what's interesting is he says that there's such a huge response to his work. And in the contrast is it's people discovering what they already had. And so it's different to the ideology where it's, like you say, Dad, is very pervasive. It's out there. But what he's starting to see and resonate with his audience is there are some intrinsic, or as we go into later in the chapter, talks about some values that we discover rather than we just come up with ourselves. And so I just want to say, second question is, what is something that you think Jordon Peterson has resonated with you as we've been going through this? Is it a similar thing of responsibility, or is there something else that you go, yeah, this is why I'm a big fan? Esther.
Few things, but one thing that always stands out to me is don't compare yourself to who someone is now, but compare yourself to who you were yesterday. So I've really appreciated that point of view of just like living up to your own, to improving upon yourself and competing against yourself. But I mean, there's many things, but that's just one thing.
Yeah, Charlotte, I'm interested to hear what you think about Jordon Peterson and what you like or not like.
It's very interesting because when I first listened to his stuff, it's so dense that I can't comprehend. But I think what he changed the way I see my life from goalless and pointless to have some sort of meaning.
Are you saying your life was goalless and pointless?
Before, yes. Completely pointless.
And that's the point when you met Jayden, right?
Yes. And 6 months in, I'm still like that. I'm trying to change.
Not getting better.
So now it's...
How long have you guys been going out now? It's a year and a half? Close to 2 years.
Close to 2 years. Been forever.
Dad, you've been around the block a few times. What do you what's been your response? Is it something original? Because you've got the most experience here.
Well, some of the facts and data he brings out, not so much in this book, but in some of his lectures, I found really interesting the way he was thinking. Because obviously we go to church a lot. We get a lot of our values and facts from that, which is great. But then he talks about biology and even lobsters and psychology and how people think. And as old as I am, I'm kind of out of touch with how the young generation is thinking. Now, one of the things for me personally was that I think Sean mentioned the phrase "don't sweat the small things." I'm quite good at ignoring the small things, and I've realized that there are some small things that are snakes or rats that you do have to tackle. Otherwise, they're going to get bigger and compounded. And I've appreciated that because I haven't understood sometimes why him and some of his followers and other people, I suppose, that take on these issues that seem on the surface quite shallow, but it's like the slippery slope. If you allow that to go, then the next thing and the next thing and next thing. And he's kind of saying, nip all of that in the bud and challenge things that make you uncomfortable, or don't do the things that you hate, was the phrase he used. So I appreciated that about him. It made me think about things a bit deeper.
Yeah. Same question to you, Sean.
I've had several moments where I've been listening to something that he said that I've had to stop, put on pause, replay a few times, that have impacted me greatly, where either I've wept or I've repented or it's bolstered me, where I've made life choices, life directions based on some of the things he said. Too much to share now, but the connections he makes are so self-evident that I think even in this chapter, he says some things that people say as, you were able to articulate something that I knew to be true. And it feels a little bit like he arms the common man with facts and figures and information and the reason why, so that you can live out what you already know to be true. Because there's very persuasive arguments out there that are wrong, but you don't know how to refute sometimes. And so he gives you the weaponry to fight for what you want the way that you know it'll work. Sometimes it corrects you too, but it just feels like you're armed. It feels like you know the reason why. There's deep insight. It connects a lot of the dots. And I found it invaluable on many counts. Some things, like I read the Bible most days. I know the Bible pretty well. And some things he said on scriptures that are well-trodden ground for me, I've never seen before. Angles he's taken have just connected things and highlighted things that, and even in this chapter, he talks about revelation, and he talks about the importance of revelation. Is it objective or subjective? And there's somewhere in the middle that I've had revelation on the Bible, on Jesus, listening to some of the things that JP has said from a psychological point of view, from a clinical psychological point of view. I've had revelation. So I think it's genius. It's genius, the best type of genius you could have.
Yeah. Jayden, I'd say arguably you're probably the biggest fanboy of Jordon Peterson. Do you want to talk about a bit about that?
What about some specific ideologies from him that I've picked up?
Just abandon those.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to come back to that as an idea. What's the difference between a belief and an ideology? How are we sure that we're not just going along with Guru Peterson? But I have drunk the Kool-Aid 100%. It's hard to define or pick one thing that made the most impact, because we've been listening to him for so long. But I started with the clean your room. That was the first thing I actually implemented. And then after that, I think one of the most impactful things was navigation. The 3 things you need for navigation: know where you are, know where you're going, and then that'll highlight the obstacles in the way. When I first heard that lecture, I paused it every sentence and wrote out my version of what he was saying. It was just so dense and so deep. And like you guys have been saying, he's got the evidence to back up everything that he's saying, whether it be a historical standpoint, whether it be from his clinical experiences, whether it be biological, evolutionary history, whatever it is, he can back up what he's saying. And I think that is why it's so impactful for me anyway. It just made sense the minute you hear it, and then there's a reasoning, there's tools to argue that point to other people as to why you agree with it.
Yeah, I'd say very similar on both what everyone said, but for me it was when he was challenging the status quo, and he's brave, and he does it in a way that doesn't ostracize. And when you listen to him, you, like Sean says, it's like you already knew it. Now he gives you the tools and the vocabulary and the insight into why you believe it. And in fact, this chapter goes into the ideas that it's almost like an intrinsic thing to find your values. It's not something that you come up with an idea. It's something that you discover. And I think, like he says, you don't have enough time in your life to invent values. We're always trying to discover things and learn things that are already there. So that's, yeah, it's a huge thing. So the thing is, the whole chapter is about ideology. And I want to ask, has anyone ever been a victim of or been a part of an ideology and then you've come out of it? Have you been in an experience where you have been almost in the cult, stuck to the party lines, whatever it is?
I would say I was in the UK. When I grew up in school, college, university, I was very left-leaning. And the way I would define it is ideological. I didn't really care enough to do the research or find out why. It just felt right that the underprivileged should be looked after and screw the ones that have power, because they're the ones that are hurting these people. Why do only 10 families have half the wealth in the world? That kind of thing. And I wouldn't look any deeper than that, because that felt good enough to go, I'm going to defend these people. And meanwhile, my house is a complete tip at university. I'm not going to classes. I'm failing out of everything. But I feel strongly that screw the system, man. So I think I was hook, line, and sinker into that ideology, which I think is the one he kind of highlights the most in this chapter, is that political Marxism. So yeah, I would say I was fully into that before.
I think as a Hong Kong girl, it was so much about money, like study well, get a good job, stable job, and then get a house, get married, get a kid. This is the sets of things that you need to do. And I was told for 23 years, maybe 24, 25. Oh, actually, my mom still tell me that. So I'm still in that ideology, but I kind of have a clearer picture that I don't really agree to all of those things. Like, get a stable job. I can't do it now. Like, I just know this is not for me. And even the society is telling you to go into corporate jobs and climb that ladder. I can't do it. I just won't. And then money is not the most important things in my life. But for my mom and most of the people in Hong Kong, I would say yes. They think money is the most important things. Yeah.
It's a monotheistic culture.
Money is God.
Did you say money-atheistic?
Monotheistic.
Dad, were you ever part of an ideology back in the 60s and hippies? And did you ever get stuck in anything? Two ideologies.
I guess, when you're fighting a war, you swallow the propaganda. You know what I mean? So otherwise you wouldn't bother fighting if you thought you were on the wrong side. But in retrospect, looking back, it was probably a war that shouldn't have been fought. But at the time, I was protecting the families back home, and you know, I was the good guy, and yeah. So I guess I didn't think through the complexities of what the war was about. I mean, there were bad things on the other side, but I'm sure there were bad things on our side, and then politically it was very unbalanced. And so, yeah, I guess I bought that propaganda, if that's an ideology at the time. And I think in most wars, people have that. I mean, people like to be tribal. You just look at the football clubs in England, or you know, and that kind of thing. But they'll unite when they're playing England versus, you know, Italy or something. They'll unite. But when it comes back home, boy, if you're Manchester United, you don't talk to Liverpool and all of that kind of stuff. So we do have our tribals, and I think that's where ideology can be most effective in the worst way. You want to be part of the tribe, so you don't want to be rejected. You don't want to stick out like a thumb. Thankfully, the older you get, the less you care about sticking out. Yeah, so I'm glad I'm old.
Is ideology?
Got it.
Because I could say from the church that I used, well, from my religious upbringing, there was definitely elements of ideology where you just swallow things hook, line, and sinker, and you don't research it or look into it, and it's just a commonly held, accepted belief that actually doesn't even feel good or make you better, but because that's what the group is doing, you go along with it. I definitely experienced elements of that.
Yeah.
I remember early on in my Christianity, we had a pastor that said the biggest war in Christianity at the moment is whether full immersion baptism is the right thing to do, which it is, because, you know, everything else is just evil. So I didn't quite swallow that whole. I kind of agreed, yeah, it's better to have a believer's baptism fully immersed, but I'm not going to hate a Christian that was christened as a baby. You know what I mean? So I didn't swallow it, but that was the ideology being thrown out there. Like, this is the most important thing in Christianity. Well, no, it isn't. Read the Bible, read about Jesus's life. That's not the most important thing about Christianity. So, yeah, I think it's good to be a little bit skeptical, and as people do have something to back up what they're saying. I think it's a healthy thing to just question what people are saying. And so, yeah, but it's thrown at you in all sorts of arenas. Just believe this. Why? Because I said so. Don't think through it. Just believe it.
There's almost a necessity for it. Like, it's hard to have a high resolution picture of everything because you have to pay attention to everything.
Yes.
So if you're aiming single-mindedly at something, you kind of need a bit of ideology, which you don't have to look into every moment, you know?
Yeah.
It's almost like
hear about it.
you get a foundation set up that sets you, like, that's where you do your research. My foundation is this, my goal is this, and then everything else can be a bit low resolution.
Yeah.
I guess it's adopting an ideology where now this is the most important thing. That's where you should be doing your research.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
But when you say, Jordon, in the modern context, let's say you are passionate about one specific topic, but the pressure socially now is if you don't conform to an ideology, then like you have to placate and be careful and almost just go with the flow, because if you don't, you get cancelled. So it's like there's a difference between being passive and active. Like what Jordon Peterson, I think, is trying to get at is there's people who are very smart, but they're lazy.
Yeah.
And they reduce an argument to one idea. He talks about what's his name? Frederick Lung. What's the
Nietzsche?
No, not Frederick Nietzsche. I'm getting the two guys.
Jung?
Jung, not Jung, his friend.
Freud.
The guy who sexualizes
Sigmund Freud.
Sigmund Freud. Got there. Well done, guys. And he talks about everything is sexualized.
Oh.
And he said you take something that's incredibly vital and important, and then you just either say it's very important or not important, depending on your own ideas. And I think that's how society works, especially in modern. It's extreme now because of how things have become so extreme that you end up as just a sheep. You don't know what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do, right? Because you just don't want to be rejected or cancelled.
Do you think that happens because there's no manual for it? Like this just comes from people's ideas, as opposed to there being some like something written down, or like a Bible. So you've got a Bible, right? So you actually literally have a manual for how to live your life. But a lot of these other things are concocted from the latest trend or whatever's going on in society that people think is a righteous cause or whatever. But there's actually no true, like there's no ultimate truth backing it up. That's just kind of comes from whatever they think is.
I would say the manual that informed cancel culture, if that's what you're talking about, is Marxism.
Which he goes into. Do you want to explain Marxism?
Well, Marxism would be more from a financial point of view, and then later changed through postmodernism to, instead of the power struggle being over money, it was over power itself. So I'd say today, if we're talking about cancel culture, it's because an oppressor is oppressing an oppressed person. So someone without power is being oppressed, and that's where the struggle is, and everything is divided into black and white for those. So if you don't agree with the person at the party saying, this woman should get paid as much as that guy, what you're doing is siding with the oppressor against the oppressed. So there is a manual that informs that. I just think it's an old manual called Marxism.
Yeah. I think also, like you said, Dad, it comes down to experience, because when you're younger, like when I was younger, I just had BBC News as my homepage, and whatever BBC News said, it was supposed to be unbiased, but whatever it said, I just went with, and that was my facts and information, and that was my worldview, and I thought I was informed. But as you get older and wiser, you realize, well, hang on, there's a lot of different points of view on this case. And so it's like what Jordon Peterson says is you can't be lazy. You actually gotta put in the work. If you're gonna hold to some values and stuff, you really need to know what you're talking about. And that's when he goes and does his lectures, he says he loves this, which is what stand-up comedians do, right? They go into an audience and they test their ideas and they see if it resonates. And he talks about that moment of silence in the room. And he says he aims to get the whole audience singularly focused on what he's saying, because then he knows it's important. And that's how he hones his speech and hones his ideas. And I think we all, to some extent in society, need to be able to have ways to hone what we think. I think as a family, we do that really well.
Yeah, that goes back to that being socialized, in the sense that you use society as a...
Outsource your mental health, yeah.
Yeah, I'm reading this chapter. I realized I swallow a lot of history and ideas just from single sentences and things I just have big gaps in. I mean, my scarcity of the Russian revolution and all that, I was amazed, because I had to look up the word, what a kulak was. I don't know if you guys have come across that name before, but the poster in the front says, in our cults, we'll have no priests or kulaks. And what's a kulak? And I looked it up on Uncle G, and they were like they were peasants, farmers, but they were a bit more entrepreneurial. So they got bigger farms and they made more money than anyone else. And they would hire other peasants. And so they became the oppressor, even though they were only slightly more wealthier than the ordinary peasant. And
they're like farm landlords.
Yeah. But they were peasant people. They weren't educated city folk or anything like that. And they were hated, and they were used as the scapegoat, I suppose, like the Jews in Nazi Germany, as all the woes of Russia. And Lenin even ordered in one area in Russia for 100 of them to be hung, and another few hundred taken as prisoners as a display of punishment for being so evil as to be rich. So I thought, well, it was I never realized it was so bad.
Like white farmers in Zimbabwe.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah. Although they were good people. A lot of them were good people. And that's the complexity of it, isn't it? And then I think it was Stalin, he forced volunteers into these communes and took food away from some places that had more food, like the Ukraine. And they said 6 to 11 million people died of starvation because of those kind of correcting what they thought was an imbalance. It's just evil. It's just terrible. Now, I didn't realize all of that. I knew there was trouble, but I didn't realize it was so from the top, from the power. But the power wasn't the trouble then, like you're saying it is now, Jordon. The power then was the rich oppressing the poor. And you get good rich people and you get bad poor people. You know, it's just too complex to black and white it like that.
Two groups, yeah.
No. So yeah. So I want to bone up a bit more on my histories of revolutions and.
Well, it's like you say, if you're subdividing between, say, rich and poor, at what point do you stop?
Yeah.
Because you will get to a point where there's only one person left alive, the poorest person.
That's right.
Like if you keep subdividing and subdividing, that's where that ideology leads to.
Exactly. Yeah. And then the other thing that I just had a sentence was God is dead. Nietzsche must have been an awful, awful person. Everyone quotes him, but he must be terrible. And then Peterson makes a point. It wasn't a triumphant statement. It was like, it's all going to fall apart.
Yeah.
If in our culture God is dead, then it's going to fall apart. People are going to be polarized. Yeah. He actually prophesied that millions would die and that supermen, what do they call them? Ubermensch will come to the front. But Peter says, okay, so you get these supermen that bring the values without God. Yeah. But aren't those supermen going to fight? Because they're going to come up with different values. You know? And then the Nazis use that idea perversely as a social idea, not supermen, but the Aryan race, a whole race that's supposed to be super, which apparently Jordon Peterson is saying Nietzsche would have hated that idea because it was supposed to be an individual Superman, not a race of supermen. So it's all very perverse and people twist it for their own political gains, you know? Yeah, very sad. Some of that history is very sad. And millions died in each of those turns.
Yeah, and what's sad is that could possibly repeat with some of the ideologies that still exist.
Yeah.
Look at, that's just in the history books, but there's very real possibilities that type of stuff can repeat itself.
Yeah.
Which means no one's learned anything.
Yeah.
I've got a question though, and maybe Sean, you can answer this. If we're supposed to abandon ideology, how does Jordon Peterson get to the point? What are we supposed to do instead of abandon ideology? Where does he go from that?
He sort of sums it up at the end of the chapter, I believe, where he says, start by cleaning your room. You start at where you're at, and then you build up a momentum to where you can actually start to when you take that responsibility and you become good at that responsibility, look for a bigger responsibility. And as you're able to carry that and become successful at that, move that momentum on and upwards, and you can actually impact your family and your community, et cetera, et cetera. I think that's where the protection comes in, because now you're grounded in reality. You've got to deal with some of those complexities. You are dealing with a higher resolution picture because you're on the coalface. You're actually dealing with these things. He doesn't say that specifically, but I think that's the antidote to delusion. You actually got to do the thing. I don't know how many decision tables you've sat around where people just spout nonsense. Oh, we got to do this. We got to do that. Oh, we'll make this thing happen. And it's that's a garbage. It sounds good. It sounds attractive. And a lot of people are nodding their head around the table. And then you think, well, who's going to do this? Are you? And then you start to say, okay, so-and-so, you do it. Oh, well, people start to backtrack because it's just cheap words. When you actually have to put your words into action, reality kicks in, delusion runs out of the door, or you run out of the door with your delusion. And I think that's a great antidote because it's not something clever. It's not something intellectual. It's reality. And then you start to find out what your values are. And then as you get some success, like talking about power, and you realize you worked hard for that bit of success and that bit of money, and it wasn't just down to someone oppressing you. Actually, you had to figure out the solution. You had to do the extra hours, and you had to be a good employee, or had to find a gap in the market to be the entrepreneur, or whatever it is. You realize, oh, hold on, the success, the momentum of success that I got wasn't because I'm a bad person and oppressive. And I think that's one of the things that changes people's ideology is actually they go through the motions, they go through the process, and they get the result.
Very good.
Everyone wants to eat the rich until you figure out that actually most of us who are able to watch this thing on YouTube are part of the rich.
Yeah, exactly.
Esther, raising kids, how do we get our kids to be able to be ideological proof that they're able to come across these very tantalizing ideas that lead down dark paths? How do we ideologically proof them?
I'm not sure if you can proof them because there probably is a level
We
of
have to, my love. We got to do it.
experimentation that they need to go through personally. Otherwise, they're under ideology, right? If they don't have the chance to test their own ideas, then that's probably a bad sign in and of itself. But I think, for us, we do our best to promote ideas based in the Bible. That's because for us, we see that works.
Yeah.
And they're very deep, simple truths. But yeah, I think they're gonna.
What's the antidote to an ideology?
I think the antidote to ideology is to be able to have things like free speech, where everything is okay to talk about, and you broach every subject, and you allow that confrontation, and that, like I was saying, Jordon Peterson goes into an audience and he's constantly, like he says, always assume the person you're talking to knows more about something. You've got to enter into dialogue trying to learn and not trying to preach. And definitely in school that we run, I'm always trying to promote the idea that everyone is allowed to talk. But I'm always right. So.
But it's a huge thing with kids not being fearful. Because I know there's elements of my upbringing where it was like certain subjects, you don't talk about it. Why?
Taboo.
Because they scare us and because we don't know what to do with them. So we don't talk about them. And that always makes you feel insecure. Like there's something weak in our structure because we can't broach that. And it's one really great thing, like since meeting this family and since growing up, that was a real area of freedom for me, that if you can't talk about it, that's a problem. You got to look into that. You got to why can't you talk about it? Why are you afraid of this? And I think with kids, that's a huge thing because kids love to shock you. They love to just come out with a swear word or something, and to see what you do and where the boundary is and how secure are we and what do we believe. And so I think it's a big thing of not bringing fear into the equation, and just, knowing what you believe, but being open, like you said, to very frank conversation and asking questions and being willing to learn always. But like you just said.
What would you say, Jordon?
I would completely agree. I was just thinking, you were talking about raising kids to be ideological proof, or whatever the terminology is. I think it would be hard to escape some ideologies, but if you've got that ground framework of being able to put your idea out there and argue it with another idea, then they are ideological proof. right? If they're open to their idea being bested by a different idea, then you can't be had by ideology. Stephen Fry and Jordon Peterson had an interview recently. It was really good. I would recommend it. And they talk about how they know that Jordan's ideas aren't ideological, and how about his followers not being just the same as the people he's attacking, which I thought was a great idea and talking ground for them to go through. And Peterson says, I've got a book list of 100 books on my website, a lot of which don't agree with my ideas. And I encourage people that are fearful that this is an ideology to go and read those books. And he basically states that his ideas are coming from a place of other ideas fighting out, and then this being what's won so far. But he's open to debate. And Stephen Fry and him have a great debate about the nature of God and the universe and good versus evil. And there's nothing he's precious about. He can just put the idea out there. So I think the same thing with kids is, as long as they're open to dialogue, they're safe.
Yeah, you can be secure.
When we were younger, I used to love history, and one of my favorite periods of history was Greek history. I loved Alexander the Great, and I just thought the Greeks were the best thing ever. And so whenever I read history, that's what I would focus on, and I looked at his marches and his campaigns that he did, and I just loved the Greeks. And the biggest nemesis, the biggest enemies for the Greeks were the Persians. So the Persians were the bad guys. And then when I was 16, 17, I went and got a job at Rocco's Pizza, and it was Iranians who were Persians. And when I started to encounter them, I would talk about history. And one of the guys in particular, Mazda, is a great guy, very articulate, very intelligent, degrees coming out of his ears, but working at a pizza shop, so he was a complete mess. And I would talk to him about history, because that's what he loved to engage in debates and topics. And I would talk to him about Alexander the Great. And from the Persian perspective, they had a different idea, and they knew the other side of the campaigns. And he just loved the fact that the 16-year-old knew something about his culture, and then loved the fact that I was completely wrong about what I believed. And for years we would argue and debate, and I treasure those memories, because I remember thinking, oh, my whole life I've believed this one angle. And I mean, it's thousands of years old, and it doesn't really make a lot of difference to anybody's daily life. But I believe this one angle, and now I've encountered a reality where people were coloring in the other side of the picture. And I had now I still love Alexander the Great, and I still think he was great, and the Persians respected him. But it colored an other side. It made me appreciate that there are many sides to an argument or a point. And I think that part of that process that allowed me to have that experience and be open to the other side of the experience was that as Whaleys, we will often discuss and take counterpoints on purpose to look at it and to look under the carpet and figure this out and figure that. Nothing's taboo. We can't not talk about things, we can't not touch things. And I think it's a very powerful place to be for everything to be on the table.
Yeah.
Which is actually, when you think about science, Dad, you'll know this better than all of us. That's the René Descartes. He looked at the table. He said, okay, what's on the table? He asked the difficult questions. How do I exist? And actually, it's a very healthy thing to be able to do. There's no scientific advancement without that question. Why is it? Is it really that? Let's question it. Let's look at it. Let's test it.
Yeah.
And I think it's a very healthy thing.
Mm.
Scientists get a buzz when the experiment doesn't go like they hypothesized. They want it to go wrong so they can find something new, So yeah, they love it. Unless you're touching their ideology, which is perhaps it's only evolution, macroevolution. Don't touch that kind of stuff, because then they won't like it. But you guys were talking about woke the other day and how pervasive it was. I hadn't understood that at all. And I went and researched, and it started from Black people being awake to the fact that they had been slaves, and then it's kind of been taken over, like, oh, we're on the side of the oppressed, but it has become ridiculous. It's not about Black anymore exclusively. It's about everything that you want to criticize. no solutions, just agree with us and do these pathetic things to prove you're woke, that it's become, from what I hear, I don't really know because I'm not in that kind of circle, where it's become almost wrong to be woke because it's so ridiculous.
Okay, so earlier, Keith, you mentioned the word thing. What about objective truth? Does it really exist? Because earlier Sean mentioned the Greek story with like both sides, and people are seeing different things, which they also consider as truth, but they just are not well put together.
Yeah.
Then everyone can like see a whole picture. So is objective truth exist?
Does objective truth exist?
Yeah.
Hmm.
What do you think, Jason?
You want me to answer that? That's such a difficult question.
Yes.
So objective truth would be true to anyone at any time, because subjective would mean it's subject to their opinion, context of time. Is objective truth, I mean, this is what philosophers have talked about for centuries. I don't have an answer to that. I don't know, do you guys?
I think Peterson talks a bit about this, that as you work things out in the world, it would appear that this is true because when you do this, this happens. You know, like whatever, certain ways to manage a relationship, or if you do this, this will produce this. I think that's how a lot of people probably figure out what is true or not true, like how it works itself out in reality. But I mean, we would probably be a little bit different. Not that we don't believe that things have to be functional to be, in a sense, true or real. But I think that's probably one thing that Peterson talks about quite a bit.
Yeah, he does say there's scientific truth, but he says it goes, I think, beyond. I'm not sure if he uses those words, but he goes beyond reason. There are things. He said, I think he mentioned consciousness. Scientists can't explain human consciousness. They just don't have the means for it. They can talk about, you know, signals buzzing around in your brain, but consciousness itself, they can't explain. But when it comes to relationships and points of view of what happened in history and how this should happen, it's just so complex. I think there's many truths, and you choose the group of truths you want. So it's always going to be subjective. So, but there are objective truths. Like if you jump off a tall building, you're probably going to go downwards. But you know, they're not complex truths.
Dad's become a postmodernist. Sure.
I don't like that.
Like your float.
Like Peterson talked about reciprocity, that, you know, if you share, sharing is good, not just because it's a nice idea, but if you share, it's going to actually benefit your survival. It's going to better your future. It's going to, you know, over the long term, if you do certain things,
Play the game. Yeah.
they will benefit your life and they will reap a good reward. So I think often he comes across truths, sometimes often in that way. He talks a lot about reciprocity.
So Sean, you had a grimace on your face when Dad was talking. Can you explain?
Well, it sounded like postmodernist.
Did it?
Well, what's true for you is fine, and what's true for me is fine, and they can both be true. And I think decades before listening to Peterson, I think I was a firm believer in objective truth. And I think you do have a subjectivity when you approach that truth, sure. But I believe strongly that there is objective truth. And you could argue that very simply. Humans don't need air to survive. Okay, well, I can prove it. Stop breathing. And then you stop existing. It's an easy, and there's I wouldn't say infinite, but a large amount of proofs you could have for objective truth. And but you can experience that objective truth subjectivity. So you could look at the same sun, and to you it may be orange because if you're part of the world, it's 5 p.m., but it looks yellow or white to me because it's 12 p.m. Sure. Or you can't see the sun because it's nighttime in some other place. Sure, your experience at that particular moment of time could be different, but the sun still exists. So I think there is objective truth. It's a postmodernist ideology to take the objective nature out of reality so that they can reshape it whatever way is convenient. And I don't even, if the postmodernists didn't exist, I don't think people would even argue about objective truth. I don't know of another ideology that tried to undermine that. Not that I'm the most educated on this particular topic, but I believe that there is objective truth. And the whole of science is trying to find out what the truth is, what the law is, what the principle is. They wouldn't be trying to do that.
About complex perspectives, Persians versus Greeks perspectives.
Yeah.
And there's truth in both of those stories, but there's untruths as well.
Sure.
Because it's been skewed. So that's subjective. Scientific facts, some of them have been debunked, but there is, like I say, you jump off a building, you're going downwards. So I'm not postmodernist, I'm pre-modernist.
I remember in university, we were talking about with a friend, and he was a postmodernist, and he said, "Seamus, you can see this wall, and you can see a wall and bricks, but I could see this wall, and it could be a carrot." And I went, "Eat it." And it's such a weird thing, postmodernism, and not, we can all have as you say, we can be subjective about things, but if you don't have a solid, objective, like when Jordon says you discover your values, there's a resonance amongst people that he says is like, he goes around across the English speaking nations and he says this resonates with everyone, regardless of country, culture, gender, age, and I think there is these, like when certainly when you listen to what he's saying, or there's something that just, what Jesus says, you go, everyone can get something from that. And I'm also a big believer in objective truth, but I do think how we get there is important, because if it becomes this objective truth and now you have to believe it even if you don't question it, then it becomes an ideology, and that's where things can turn cultish and rotten.
I got a great story about that, Shay. I got a friend, let's call him Zach, and Zach was arguing with somebody. It was a family member, and they were arguing about truth, and the family member was going, "What's true for you is fine, and what's true for me is true for me," and postmodernist, blah, blah, blah. And Zach was not having any of it. He was all about objective truth, and they started to fight, and the family members started to goad him and have little goes, and it became very, very heated. It ended up Zach on top of this guy, punching him in the face. And I saw his knuckles the next day. They were bloated and cuts, and he was punching him in the face and said, "Is this true? Is this really happening?" Punching him.
That's the truth.
So you're right. If you want to drive home objective truth, you can do it in a violent manner. But I thought that was just a beautiful, beautiful moment.
Yeah. It's almost like a functional truth then.
Yeah.
It's like you can have your opinion on it, but how does it, the wall can't be a carrot because you can't eat it, right? That's true for that guy because he's feeling it. It's like you can believe whatever you want and it can be true in whatever way you want, but will it function in the real world like that? No.
Yeah.
It's almost like a functional truth.
Yeah,
that's good. I like that.
And that's where Jordon says, they're smart people and they become lazy and they just go with what they want. And he says that often comes with arrogance. you pick up this ideology and you often get very arrogant about it and you're not listening to the other person. But if I can wrap up with the end of the chapter, I just want to read what he says. He says, have some humility, clean up your bedroom, take care of your family, follow your conscience, straighten up your life, find something productive and interesting to do and commit to it. When you can do all that, find a bigger problem and try to solve that if you dare. If that works too, move on to even more ambitious projects. And as the necessary beginning to that process, abandon ideology. And with that, I think we're going to wrap up. Thanks for listening, guys. We'll see you next week.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye.